Welcome back to the Obby series. In today's episode, we're going to be implementing the VIP system. Now, how the VIP system is going to work in our game is there's going to be an on-screen button which displays VIP. When a player clicks it, they're actually prompted to subscribe using Roblox's brand new subscription system, meaning that players will be charged monthly for the perks given by VIP. Now, once a player does subscribe, what perks do they actually receive? Well, they receive a prefix in chat that lets all the players in their game know that they are a VIP. In addition to that, they also get double the amount of skips that normal players get, so they get 2 instead of 1. And then, every single time the player rebirths, they also rebirth twice instead of only a single time. Now, to get started with implementing this system into our game, the first thing that we're going to do is actually add in the GUI button on the right-hand side of the screen. So to do this, we're going to go inside of the starter GUI, inside of the right screen GUI, inside of the frame, and inside of here, we already have a text button, which is called Reset. Let's go ahead and duplicate that text button. Then we'll go ahead and rename one of them to be called VIP in all capital letters. That is a little bit important, so make sure that you do follow the same naming scheme as me. Then inside of this text button, we have an icon image label. So let's go ahead and update the image. And I'm going to go ahead and use the VIP crown. Then for the title text label, let's go ahead and update the text of this to say VIP in all capital letters. And now that we've done that, we're actually fully finished when it comes to creating GUIs for this episode. And now the next thing that we're going to do is actually update the player data and then the state manager like we've done many times in the past. So we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, and we'll go ahead and open up the player data module script. Inside of here, where we create the player data type, let's go ahead and add in a brand new key value pair to this. The key that we're going to want to add is going to be called VIP in all lowercase letters. And for the type of the value, it is going to be a Boolean. Then let's scroll down a little bit to where we actually have the default player data variable. And after adding codes to this table, let's go ahead and also add in VIP to this table. And by default, we're going to set that to false because players will not have VIP when they join our game for the first time. And now that we've updated the player data, that's all that we have to do inside of this module. But like usual, we also have to update the state manager as well. So we'll go inside of the functions folder and then go ahead and open up the update state module. Then inside of here, we're going to want to go ahead and add in another table to the update state action. So let's go ahead and add that now. For the type of this, we're going to go ahead and call it update VIP. Again, make sure VIP is all in capital letters. And then this is also going to have a value as well, which is going to be a Boolean. We need to include the value as well in order to be able to easily communicate when a player has purchased VIP or maybe even when their VIP has expired. So now that we've added that action, I'm going to go ahead and reformat this code just like that. And now let's actually implement this action into this function as well. So below our if statement for redeeming a code, let's go ahead and check if the type of this action is actually update VIP. And if it is, then what we're going to do is update the player's data, more specifically the VIP Boolean of the player data, and we're going to set that to the value which was passed with this action as well. And now that we've done that, we're also finished with updating the state as well, so we can go ahead and close out of that module. Now, the next thing that I want to do is go ahead and create the subscription for the VIP product or subscription that we actually want to sell. Now, unfortunately, we're unable to do this inside of Roblox Studio, and we actually have to go to the creator dashboard to do this. Now, if you're unfamiliar with how to access the creator dashboard, in my opinion, the easiest way is to go to the game settings, go to monetization, and I actually learned this from the last episode where it says badges. You can go ahead and click this create button. And then once you're on this page, you're going to want to go ahead and select your specific game. Then in the left column, you're going to want to scroll down to the monetization section and then go ahead and select subscriptions. Once you're on the subscriptions page, we can go ahead and create our first subscription. Of course, we need to include an image, and I'm going to use the same image that we used for the VIP button. After this, we need to specify the name of the subscription, which I'm just going to call VIP. Then we need to specify the subscription period, so how often this renews. But we're actually not even able to change this option, so I'm not sure why they're presenting it to us. Maybe when you're watching this video, you might actually be able to change the period. Anyways, after that, we have the price, and we actually have some fixed prices. So we have to choose one of the options that Roblox is giving us, and I'm just going to go with the cheapest one. Now, on the right-hand side of this webpage, you can see a pretty cool graphic which displays how much you actually earn and breaks it down and makes it very easy for you to understand. Anyways, now that we understand the pricing, let's go ahead and set the description. For the description, I'm going to say get a unique chat tag as well as earn double skips and rebirths. Then we can select the product type, and we have a couple of different options. Now, if you're not really sure which one you should pick, what I would recommend that you do is click the Learn More button right here, which will take you to the Roblox documentation, which breaks down the product type a little bit more. Now, because our VIP does not include any permanent inexperienced benefits, I'm going to go with consumable because our benefits are temporary or limited usage that users can repurchase. And now that we finished filling out all the information for a subscription, we're going to go ahead and click on Create Subscription. Now, before you create the subscription, it is going to give you a little notification saying that once the subscription is created, you will not be able to make any changes other than replacing the image. So make sure that you've set up everything correctly and how you want it, because you're not going to be able to make any changes once you actually create it. Since I'm happy with how we set ours up, I'm going to go ahead and click on Create, and then it should take you back to the subscriptions page, and you should be able to see that it is sort of being created. Now, when we look at the subscription, we can see that it currently is displaying inactive. And when I've created game passes or developer products in the past, I'm kind of used to having to go onto each game pass and then actually enabling that game pass for sale. So that's what I was thinking that we're going to have to do with this subscription as well. But when you actually go to the subscription page, there is no place or button to actually enable it. Instead, it's a little bit hard to see, but if you hover over the actual VIP subscription icon and kind of move your mouse towards the top right-hand corner, you should see 3 dots right here. And when you click them, that'll actually give you the option to activate the subscription. So we can go ahead and click on Activate, and then Roblox is going to inform you about how your experience name is going to be displayed on subscription receipts and notifications. So just make sure that if your experience contains any odd characters or is a very long name, you may want to modify this a little bit, but I'm perfectly fine with our experience name being displayed exactly how it is here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Confirm. Now that we've confirmed that, it tells us that we are able to activate it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Activate. And wow, that subscription actually did manage to activate. If you're having any difficulties activating the subscription, at least in terms of following through this video, that's not something that you actually have to worry about. Basically, when I was scripting this originally to test this entire system out, I created this subscription in a different game project over an hour ago. And every single time when I try to activate it now, or even for the past hour, something goes wrong every single time. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. But even though I'm unable to activate it, I still was able to fully test the entire system out. And it almost seemed like the subscription was actually active, even though it was displaying inactive. So like I said, as you're going through this video, if it is inactive, you probably don't have to worry about that. But when you go to actually publish your game and try to sell the subscription, that's when you might have to double check that your subscriptions are active, because if they're inactive, I feel like another player will be unable to actually purchase it. Anyways, one of the only other things that we're going to need to do on this page is actually get the subscription ID. And we can see that displayed right down here along with the copy button. So we can go ahead and click that to copy the subscription ID. Or if you don't see that button, you can click the 3 dots right here and click copy subscription ID just like that as well. Because once we get back to scripting, we will be using this ID. So now that we've created the subscription and we have the ID, we're completely finished on this page and we can go right back to Studio. So now that we're back inside of Studio, the first thing that we're going to do is set up the store config. Now, I didn't really mention in the beginning, but in this episode, we're going to kind of be setting up 2 different systems. The primary system that we're going to be setting up is the VIP system, but in addition to that, we're also going to be setting up the store system, and our store system handles things like developer products, game passes, and subscriptions as well. Now, we're not going to be fully implementing the store system in today's episode. We're really only going to be implementing all of the code which is required for subscriptions and more specifically for VIP. And then within the next few episodes, we will be implementing the entire store system and then implementing game passes as well as developer products as well. So like I said, the first thing that we want to do is go ahead and get started by creating the store config. So we'll go inside of the replicated storage, inside of configs folder, and then we'll go ahead and create a brand new module script, which of course we'll go ahead and rename to be called store. Then for the module variable, we'll go ahead and update that to be called shared. And of course, we'll go right above that variable and create our local variable, which will be set to a table like we always do. Now, towards the very top of the script, we're going to want to get 2 services. The first service that we're going to want to get is the marketplace service, and the second is going to be the run service. And now the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and create a brand new type. And this type is going to be used by other scripts which require this module script. So of course, we're going to go ahead and export that type. And now this type is called store item info, and it's going to be a table. Now, if you've watched the last episode where we implemented badges into our game, we created the badge info type. And realistically, what the badge info type was, is it was pretty much what is returned from the get badge info async method. So we use the badge service to get information about a specific badge based on its ID. And we're essentially going to do the exact same thing here for all of our game passes, developer products, and subscriptions. Now, of course, we're not going to use the get badge information async method. Instead, we'll use a method from the marketplace service. But the overall structure of this is very similar to what we did with the badges. Anyways, the information that we're going to get for each of the items is first, it's going to be the ID, and the ID is going to usually be a number, but sometimes it's going to be a string. And realistically, it's only going to be a string if it is a subscription. Remember how earlier I told you to copy the subscription ID? Well, this is an example of what my ID actually looks like. So it literally is a string. It's EXP, then a dash, and then a bunch of numbers. So yeah, it's a little bit weird. I don't know why Roblox made subscriptions have a completely different ID type than everything else, but it is what it is. Then, in addition to the ID, we're also going to get the name, which is going to be a string. Then we'll get the description, which is going to be a string as well. Then we'll get the price, which is going to be a number. And finally, we're going to go ahead and get an image, which is going to be a string as well. Now, we're not going to really use this type very often in terms of actually scripting. Again, looking back at how our badges are set up, realistically, what I would have liked to have done is create a table for all of the store item info, and then we would use that type to specify what the variable would actually look like. But because of how we're going to set up our store variable, if we were to specify the type of this, it would be a pretty ugly looking type. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So going back to the store, now that we've created that type, the next thing that we're going to do is actually create the store variable. And this is actually going to be a part of the shared table. So we're going to create the variable inside of here. We'll go ahead and say shared.store equals, and now it's going to equal a table. And now this table is going to be a dictionary. So it's going to have key value pairs. And the reason for that is because this table is actually going to be segmented off into game passes, products, and subscriptions. So we're going to say game passes equals, and we're just going to set that to a blank table for now. Then below that, we'll say products equals a blank table as well. And then finally, we'll add subscriptions, which is going to equal a blank table as well. But now we'll actually go ahead and add a subscription to this table. And now how these tables are going to be set up, subscriptions, products, and game passes, is they're actually going to be an array of store item info. So let's go ahead and create a table inside of subscriptions. We'll add the ID property to here, and then we'll specify what our ID actually is. So because of how we have the store table actually segmented off into game passes, products, and subscriptions, that's why we're not going to actually create a local variable for this and then specify the type of store, because the type would actually end up being pretty long and a little bit ugly. Now that we've created the store variable, the next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and create a brand new function. This function is going to be a part of the local table, and it's going to be called generate store, and it's not going to have any parameters. Now, similar to how we scripted badges, this function is going to be called when this module is required for the first time. And what we want to do inside of this function is we actually want to update the store table so that it includes all of the information about each of the individual game passes, the products, and subscriptions. So we're going to populate the table by using the ID that we specified inside of here, and then we'll actually update this table with all of the other things that we don't have from the store item info. Now, when it comes to subscriptions, or at least how our subscription is set up, we actually only need to generate this table on the client side. But when it comes to game passes and developer products, that's when we are actually going to do this on the server side as well. So in order to only do this on the client side, what we're going to do is create a variable called isClient. And to determine if this module is running on the client, what we can do is use the run service, because the run service has a method called isClient. So if this is being used on the client side, then we know that we do actually want to populate that table with all of the information about each of the subscriptions. So to do that, we're going to iterate through all of the subscriptions inside of the subscriptions table. So we're going to say for underscore comma subscription in shared.store.subscriptions do. Then we want to go ahead and get some information about that subscription. So we're going to go ahead and create a variable called info. And to get the information about the subscription, we need to use the marketplace service. And more specifically, we need to use a method of the marketplace service called getSubscriptionProductInfo async. Then all we have to do is actually pass through the ID of the subscription to this method. And now that we've gotten the info about that subscription, we can actually go ahead and update that subscriptions table. And this is actually really easy to do. We're going to say subscription.name, and then we're going to set that to the info.name. Then we'll say subscription.description, and we'll set that to info.description. Then we'll set the price, so we'll say subscription.price equals info.price. And finally, we can go ahead and specify the image, which we're actually going to use string.format on this, because what's actually returned from this method is the ID of the image, which is just the number part of it. But in case we wanted to easily use this image in the future, we can turn that image ID number into an actual full-on image string, and then we can easily use it. And I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to insert a string, which is going to say RBX asset ID, and make sure you spell this all exactly the same way that I'm doing it. Then we'll use a colon, and we'll say //. Then after that, we're going to use a %sign and a D. And then for the second argument, we're going to pass through info dot and now icon image asset ID. So by using string.format, what's going to happen is the %D is going to be replaced with what the actual image asset ID is. And like I said, you're going to want to make sure that you spelled everything here correctly and the exact same way that I do, and also right here correctly and the exact same way that I do as well. Otherwise, you're probably going to run into some issues. Cool. So now that we've created that function, let's go ahead and actually call it. And we're just going to go ahead and call it right below where we created it, just like that. And now that we've created that function, we're actually finished with creating the store config, at least for this episode, so we can go ahead and close out of that module. Now, the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and create the networking for this. And what I mean by that is we're going to want to go ahead and create a remote event. So inside of the remotes folder, we're going to go ahead and create a brand new remote event, which is going to be called Update VIP. And we're going to use this remote event to communicate to all of the players on the server who our VIP players are. So typically we'll use this whenever a player joins the game who is a VIP, or whenever the player actually subscribes to the VIP and purchases the rank while they're already playing the game. And now that we've created that remote event, we're done with the replicated storage, so we can go ahead and collapse that. And now the next thing we're going to do is actually create the store service. So we're going to go inside of the server script service, inside of the services folder, and we're going to go ahead and duplicate, say, the codes service, for example, just to save us a little bit of time. We'll go ahead and rename this to be called store service, and then we'll go ahead and open up that module script. Then towards the top of the script, we are going to want to get the replicated storage, but in addition to that, we're also going to want to get the marketplace service and the player service as well. Then we are going to want to get the player data service. We don't need the codes config though. Instead, we actually do need the badges config. And in addition to the badges config, we also need to create a variable for the store config as well. And now that we've updated all of those variables, we can go ahead and delete pretty much everything else that's inside of here, or at least all of the other functions, but we'll go ahead and leave on start because we will be using this. Now, the first thing that we're going to do inside of here is go ahead and create a function to check if the player is actually subscribed to a specific subscription or not. So we're going to create a function, which is going to be a part of the local table, and it's going to be called isPlayerSubscribed. Now, this function is going to accept a player, which is of course going to be a player, and an ID, which is going to be a string, and it's going to return a Boolean. Now, for us to check if a player has purchased a subscription or not, we need to use a method from the marketplace service, and this method should be wrapped in a P call. So we're going to say local success, comma, does own subscription equals, then we'll go ahead and create our P call and our anonymous function. And now what we're going to return is the marketplace service, and then we want to use a method on it called getUserSubscriptionStatusAsync, which will require us to pass through the player as well as the ID of the subscription. Now, what's returned from that method is actually a little bit odd. That method returns a table, and that table contains two key value pairs. The first key is subscribed, and that's really the only one that we care about. But the second key is renewing, and that'll tell us if the user's subscription is still set to renew. And if this is false, then it probably means that they canceled their subscription and it will not automatically renew. So going back to what we return, what we're going to then do is index this with isSubscribed. And now after that P call, what we're going to do is if success was not true, then we're going to stop the function right there. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and return if the player owns the subscription or not. Then after that, we're going to go ahead and create another function, which again is going to be a part of the local table. And this is going to be called process subscription. And this function is going to have the same parameters as the one above. So it's going to accept the player as well as the ID of the subscription. Now with this function, the first thing that we want to do is actually get the player state. So we're going to create a variable called state. Then we'll use the player data service to get the player state. We'll go ahead and pass through the player. And if we're unable to get the player state, then we're going to stop the function right there. And now the next thing we want to do is check if the player is subscribed to this subscription. So we're going to create a variable called isSubscribed. And to check if the player is subscribed to the subscription, we're going to go ahead and use that function that we just created, isPlayerSubscribed. And we'll go ahead and pass through the player and the ID of the subscription. Then after that, we're going to create a variable called isDataSynced. And the reason that we're doing this is because this function is going to be called when players purchase a subscription in the game, but also players can purchase subscriptions through Roblox's website. So we're also going to call this function when the player joins the game in order to check if they purchased the VIP from the website, because we then want to update their player data with this as well. So to determine if the data is synced or not, we would check if isSubscribed is also the same as state.vip, because if they're not the same, then that means that they're not synced. So if they are not synced, then what we're going to do is, well, we're going to go ahead and update the player state. So we're going to go ahead and create a variable called action, which of course is of the player data service .update state action type. And the type of the action that we want to use here is update VIP. And for the value, we're going to go ahead and pass through isSubscribed. Now that we've created that action, let's go ahead and update the player state. So we're going to say player data service .update state, pass through the player, and then also pass through the action as well. And now that we've gotten the player's outdated state updated, what we're then going to do is fire off that update VIP remote event that we created earlier. So we're going to say remotes.updateVIP. And now we're going to use a method on this remote event called fire all clients, which, like the name says, it'll literally fire this remote event off to every single player in the game. Now, what information do we want to pass through when this is fired off? Well, we want to include the player whose VIP status is currently being investigated, and then we'll also pass through is subscribed in order to notify all of the clients if the player is actually a VIP or not. And then finally, at the very end of this function, what we're going to do is check if the player is a VIP. And if they are a VIP, then this is actually how we're going to reward the badge. So we're going to say badges config.reward badge. Then we'll go ahead and reward this player with the supporter badge. And now that we've created this function, let's go ahead and actually use it. And we're going to go ahead and use it inside of the onStart function. Now, like I said, inside of the onStart function, we're going to want to go ahead and use the process subscription function anytime a player purchases a subscription in the game. And now, how can we tell if a player subscribes? Well, we can actually use the player service to do that because the player service has an event called user subscription status changed, which will be fired off anytime the player subscription is renewed or canceled. So we can then go ahead and connect that to the process subscription function just like that. In addition to that, like I said, players can purchase subscriptions through the website, so when they purchase a subscription, they might not always be in our game. And because of that, we also want to call this function when the player joins the game as well. But instead of just listening to the player added event, we're actually going to listen to the profile loaded event from the player data service. So we're going to say player data service.profile loaded.event :connect. We'll go ahead and create an anonymous function inside of here, which of course will give us the player as a player. And now what we're going to do is go ahead and call the process subscription function, passing through this player. And then we need to pass through the ID of the VIP subscription. So we're going to go inside of the store config, inside of the store variable, inside of the subscriptions variable. Then we'll index that with 1 because the first subscription in our subscriptions table is the VIP subscription. And then we're going to index that table with ID to get the ID of that specific subscription. Cool. So now we're handling when the player purchases the subscription inside of the game, or if they purchase it through the website and then just join the game afterwards. And with that being said, we fully finished creating the store service, at least for this episode once again, so we can go ahead and close out of that. And now the next thing that we're going to want to do is create the Store GUI module to handle what happens when we click on the VIP button, for example. So to create this, we're going to go inside of the starter player, inside of the starter player scripts, inside of the controllers folder, inside of the GUIs folder, and then we can go ahead and duplicate the Rebirth module script. Of course, just to give us a little bit of a head start with some of the variables inside of there. Then we'll go ahead and rename one of these duplicates to be called store, and then go ahead and open that up. Now, inside of here, we are going to need the replicated storage, but in addition to that, we're also going to need the marketplace service, and then we'll also want to create a variable for the player service as well. So we'll say players and players right here as well, and there we go. Then, after all those service variables, we're going to want to go ahead and create a variable for the local player, which we're just simply going to call player, and to get the local player, we of course would say players.localplayer, and then we don't need the sound or the stages config, but instead, we do actually need the store config, so let's go ahead and create a variable for that. We will need the GUI controller, and we will need the state controller though, but we won't actually need the remotes variable, so we can go ahead and delete that as well. Then let's go ahead and update our GUI variables. We can pretty much delete most of these except for the top two. And now for the GUI, we're actually going to set this to the right GUI because that's where all of our store buttons are going to be stored at. And then for the frame variable, that's still going to remain as GUI.frame. Next, what we're going to do is delete every single function inside of here except for the onStart one. But now for the onStart one, we can pretty much delete every single thing inside of here, but we are going to listen to the update state event, so we can actually leave that part in here. If we want to make this a little bit shorter, we don't actually care about the new state, so we can delete that. And then we can also delete every single thing inside of the anonymous function where we're listening for the update state event to be fired off. So now this is pretty much what your entire script should actually look like. So as long as your script looks like this, let's get started by creating our first function. This function is going to be a part of the local table, and it's going to be called setup button. Now, like I said, all of our store buttons are going to be on the right-hand side of the screen. So we're going to have the VIP button, as well as the speed and gravity coil buttons on the right-hand side as well. And basically, what we're going to want to do with this function is we're going to want to set what happens whenever you click on one of those buttons, as well as adjust the visibility of the button, because if the player owns, say, either VIP or either of the coils, then we're actually going to hide those buttons and no longer display them to the player, because there's not really a point to display them to the player anymore, because once the player owns them, nothing's going to happen when they click on it. And you might be confused when it comes to the coils, for example, but whenever a player purchases one of the coils, it'll always automatically go into the player's inventory or backpack, so all they'll have to do is press 1 or 2 if they're on mouse and keyboard, or select those items from their backpack whether they're on mobile or any other platform. Now that we have an understanding of how this function is going to work, this function is going to have two parameters. The first parameter is going to be called info, which actually refers to the store item info. And we can get that type by using the store config and then getting the store item info type right there. And the second parameter is going to be called is Gamepass, which is going to be a boolean, and that'll actually be optional. And of course, with this, we'll pass through true or false if the button that we're setting up is a Game Pass button or not. And of course, we need that because we want to handle subscriptions a little bit differently than how we handle Game Passes. Now, one important thing is that you make sure the name of your buttons are the exact same name as the store items. And when I say the exact same name, I mean when you create the developer product or Game Pass or subscription, like we called the subscription VIP in all capital letters, for example. If you made that name any different than when you made the text button that we created today, then you're going to either want to rename that subscription or you're going to want to rename the text button, because otherwise you'll run into some issues in just a second. So now that we know our naming is all set up correctly, what we're first going to do is look for the button inside of the GUI. So we're going to create a variable called button, and to look for the button, we'll look inside of the frame. So we'll go ahead and use the find first child method on this. And the child that we're going to look for is actually inside of the info, and we're going to look for the name. Now, on the name, we're actually going to use a method called gsub, because when it comes to the coils, for example, when we create the Game Pass for the coils, I'm going to call my Game Passes speed space coil. But when it comes to the buttons, for example, I'm not a big fan of using spaces in the text button names or really any instance names inside of my Explorer. So rather than including a space there, what I'm going to do is actually replace the space by using gsub right here and just replace it with nothing. So effectively, we're actually removing the space. Now, this whole gsub method doesn't actually apply to this episode because VIP is a single word and there's no spaces there. So we're only actually doing this in terms of when the Game Pass episode comes along in order to avoid forgetting this in the future and maybe running into some issues then. Then, if we don't actually get the button, what we're going to do is return end to stop the function right there. After that, we want to check if the player already owns this item or not. So we're going to create a variable called isOwned. And again, because a lot of the things that we're going to be doing in this function are going to be for both the Game Passes and for the subscriptions, we're going to be kind of writing this logic a little bit differently or kind of temporary. So you'll see what I mean in just a second. So what we're going to say is if is Game Pass, then we're simply going to set the value of this variable to true, because we'll come back in the Game Pass episode and actually implement how we determine if the player owns a Game Pass or not. But we'll say else, because if it's not a Game Pass, then that means that it's a subscription. And to determine if the player owns the subscription or not, what we can do is simply use their state controller and get the player's state, and then we can check if VIP is set to true or false to determine if they own the VIP subscription or not. Then I'm going to leave a little comment here which says to do, just to remind myself to come back and edit this line when we go to the Game Pass episode. But now that we know if the player owns the subscription or not, we're going to begin updating the button. So the first thing that we want to do with the button is we actually want to rename the button. And what we're going to set the name to is actually the ID of the Game Pass or the subscription. And the reason that we're renaming it is to make it easier while we're scripting. Then after that, we're going to go ahead and actually update the icon image label inside of the button. And we're going to go ahead and set it to the same image that's displayed on the Game Pass or the subscription. Then let's go ahead and write the logic for what happens whenever a player clicks on the button. Now, of course, we're not getting any auto-completion suggested here for us. So what we can do is actually specify the type of the button variable and set it to being a text button. Now, when we go ahead and actually try to type out mouse button one click, it'll automatically be suggested to us. So it makes our job even easier and allows us to easily avoid making mistakes like typing the event name incorrectly. Anyways, now that we've typed out the event, we can go ahead and connect to that, create an anonymous function inside of here. And now, if this is a Game Pass and it is not owned, then we're going to do something. But I'm just going to go ahead and leave a comment in here which says to do, because we're not going to implement that logic yet. But then we can go ahead and make an else if statement. And if it is not a Game Pass and it is not owned, then we know that we're referring to the subscription and the player does not own the subscription. So if the player clicks on this and it is the subscription and they don't own the subscription, then what do we want to do? Well, we would want to prompt that player to actually subscribe. So we can do this using the marketplace service, and we need to use the prompt subscription purchase method. Then we just have to pass through the player and the ID of the subscription. So we would say info.id. And now we're pretty much done with this function, but we're going to come back to this in just a minute, because the last thing that we need to do is actually display or hide the button based on if the player owns the Game Pass or the subscription. But we're actually going to create another function for that, because we're also going to change the visibility of the button at another point as well. So it's easier to just create an entire function for this. So we're going to go ahead and create another function, which again is going to be a part of the local table, and this is going to be called update bun. Now, what this is going to accept is the ID, which would be the ID of the Game Pass or the subscription, which we'll just go ahead and specify as a string. It really doesn't matter if it's a string or a number. Either way, it's going to work here. Then for the second argument, we're going to want to know if the Game Pass or the subscription has been purchased. So we'll go ahead and call that parameter is purchased, which of course is going to be a boolean. Then the first thing that we want to do inside of this function is find the bun that we're looking for. So we'll go ahead and create a variable called bun, which again we can specify is a text bun. And to get the bun, what we're going to do is look inside of the frame. We'll use find first child, and this time rather than looking for the bun by using its name, we'll actually look for the bun by using its ID. And as long as we're able to find the bun, then what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and update the visible property of it, and we'll set it to not is purchased. So if is purchased is true because the player actually owns the subscription or the Game Pass, then the bun will no longer be visible. But if the player does not own the Game Pass or the subscription, then the bun will remain visible. And that's all that we're going to do with this function. So we can go back to setup bun, and all the way at the very bottom where we kind of left that comment at, we can go ahead and call that function. So we'll say local.update bun, and then we'll go ahead and pass through the info.id as well as is owned. And now to actually use this function, we're going to go ahead and create one more function, which again is going to be a part of the local table. And we're going to go ahead and call this generate store. And it's not going to have any parameters. Now, this is one of the functions that's going to be called when the script starts up for the first time, and it's essentially going to set up all of the buns for all of the Game Passes as well as the subscriptions. So to do this, what we want to do is iterate through all of the Game Passes and subscriptions inside of our store. Now, I know that we don't have any Game Passes yet, but it's literally going to be the exact same thing for Game Passes and subscriptions, so we'll start off by doing this for Game Passes. So, like I said, what we're going to want to do is iterate through the Game Passes table inside of our store table. So we can do this by saying for _ comma info in store config .store.game passes do. Then for each Game Pass, we're going to go ahead and call the setup bun function. So we'll go ahead and say local.setup bun, and we'll pass through info and we'll pass through true because we are iterating through Game Passes. So of course it would actually be a Game Pass. Then we can literally just go ahead, copy and paste that line. This time though, instead of iterating through the Game Passes, we of course want to iterate through the subscriptions. And now instead of calling setup bun by passing through true, we'll actually pass through false because of course our subscriptions are not Game Passes. And now that we finished creating the generate store function, we can go back to the onStart function and actually use this function because this is actually the first function that we're going to call when onStart is ran. So we'll go ahead and say local.generate store just like that. Then moving down to the update state event, what we want to do is create a variable called is subscription because what we want to do is check if the type of the action is actually update VIP. Because if it is subscription, then what we want to do is actually update that bun. So we would go ahead and say local.update bun. And now we need to specify the ID of the bun that we actually want to update. And to specify that ID, we would go inside of the store config, inside of the store, inside of subscriptions, and then we can index that with 1 because the only subscription that we have currently, and even if you add more, it's still the first subscription that we have inside of that table would be the VIP subscription. And then once we actually get the subscription that we're looking for, we're going to want to go ahead and pass through the ID. And then for the second argument, for is purchased, what we would pass through is action.value because action.value will either be true or false based on if the player has purchased VIP or not. So now it'll hide or show the bun depending on if the player owns the subscription. And with that being said, we're pretty much finished with this entire store script for right now. But of course, we'll come back to this in a future episode. So with that being said, we can go ahead and exit out of this. Now, we've got about one more script that we actually have to make for this entire system, and that is not a GUI script, so we can go ahead and collapse that folder, but instead, it's actually a controller. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and duplicate the respawn controller, and we'll rename one of these to be called the VIP controller. And then we'll go ahead and open that up. Now inside of here, we are going to need the player service as well as the replicated storage service. But in addition to that, we are also going to want to get the text chat service. Now make sure that your text chat service variable is actually the text chat service and not the text service. Because the text service and the text chat service are two different services and they can easily be mixed up. Then after that, we can go ahead and remove the player variable because we're not going to need that. But we are going to need the state controller. So we're going to go ahead and keep that. We don't need the stages config, so we can delete that, but we are going to need the remotes folder, so we can keep that. Then inside of the onStart function, we can delete every single thing inside of here, but just leave the function intact. And then we can delete every other function besides that one. Cool. I actually forgot to create a couple of variables between local and the remotes variable. So going back up here, the first variable that we're going to create is actually going to be a constant variable, which is going to be called chat_prefix_string. And this is actually going to be a string, which is actually going to be written using rich text And what that allows us to do is effectively modify how a string appears inside of the chat. Now, that may sound a little bit confusing if you're unfamiliar with what rich text is. Basically, it uses markup, which is, I think, technically a language. And markup basically allows you to modify different properties of how text appears. And markup is actually kind of used commonly throughout different services on the internet. But basically, it allows us to easily modify the color, the size, the font face, the font family, the font weight, stroke, transparency, bold, italic, underline, and a lot of other things as well. So we'll leave a link down below in the description if you want to view this page on Roblox's documentation to see all the different things that you can actually do with your text and how it'll appear in the chat. But realistically, the only one that we care about for this episode is the color, and that's what we're going to change. So you can see what this string looks like and an example of how you actually have to use this. So basically, we need to create a string with font, then we can specify the color of it, and then we have to have a closing font. If you've ever worked with HTML, the tags here, for example, are pretty similar in like that regard where you have to have an opening tag and then a closing tag. But if you haven't worked with it, either way, it really doesn't matter. What we're going to do here is pretty simple for the most part. So going back to Studio, what we're going to do is create the font tag. So we're going to use a less than symbol and then say font. Then we'll say color equals, then we'll use a quotation mark. And keep in mind, when you're making this string, you want to use the backtick symbol, which is to the left of the 1 key. And by using the backtick symbol, that allows us to actually put a quotation mark inside of here. Otherwise, if you were going to try to create this string with a quotation mark, you can't really put a quotation mark inside of a quotation mark without kind of escaping it by using this backslash symbol. So in my opinion, it's just kind of easier to use the backticks and then easily be able to put a quotation mark inside of there, but you can use whatever way you want to as long as it works for you. Now, for the color, we're actually going to create a color using RGB. Then we'll use an open parenthesis, and now we need to specify what the RGB for the color actually is. And I want to use a nice green, so I'm going to go with 255, 255, 0, then a closing parenthesis, then a closing quotation mark, and then a greater than symbol. Then, because I want to add a prefix to the player's name when they're typing, I can sort of add my text right into here. So I'll use an open bracket, then I'll say VIP, and with a space, I'm going to go ahead and insert an emoji, which I'll go ahead and use the crown emoji. Now, if you're unfamiliar with how you can add emojis inside of a string, on Windows 10, you can use the Windows key and the period symbol, but if you're not on Windows 10 or you're unable to access the emoji window, you can literally just Google like keyboard emojis or string emojis or something like that on Google, and you'll be able to find a website where you can go ahead and copy the emoji and paste it directly inside of here. Anyway, now that I got my emoji there, I'm going to go ahead and use a closing bracket. And then because I want the color to only affect the VIP prefix and for the prefix to only appear as green, what I'm then going to do is add a closing font tag. So I'm going to use a less than symbol. I'll say slash, font, and then a greater than symbol. And now this is our chat prefix string, which we'll be using in just a little bit. And now below that variable, we're going to want to create another variable, which is going to be called VIP players, and it's going to be set to a blank table. With this variable, we're actually going to store all the players in our game who are VIPs inside of here. So now that we've created all of those variables, let's go ahead and start off by creating our first function, which is going to be part of the local table, and it's going to be called update VIP. Now, this function is going to have two parameters. The first parameter is going to be the player, and the second parameter is going to be called is subscribed, which is going to be a Boolean that's actually optional, so we can add that question mark there. And now this function is going to manage and handle the VIP players table. So when a player is subscribed to VIP, it'll add the player to the VIP's players table, but if the player is not subscribed, then it'll actually remove the player from that table if the player is already inside of that table. And now to do this, we're going to say if is subscribed, then. And now, like I said, if the player is subscribed, then what we want to do is add the player to the VIP players table. So we'll say table.insert. We want to insert into the VIP players table, and we want to actually insert the player.user ID into that table. We don't need to store the entire player inside of there. We only actually need to store their user ID inside of there. Then inside of this if statement, we'll go ahead and say else, because now we want to handle if the player is not subscribed. So if the player is not subscribed, then what we want to do is create a variable called index and check if the player is already inside of that table. We can do this by saying table.find. We'll look inside of the VIP players table for the player.user ID. And now if we actually have found the player inside of there, then what we're going to do is remove the player from that table. So we'll say table.remove, and we'll actually remove the index from that table. And now we can go back to our onStart function and actually set up when we want to use this function. Now there's actually a few times when we want to use this function. The first time that we want to use this function is when the update VIP remote is actually fired off. So we can go ahead and say .onClientEvent, and then we'll say :connect, and then actually connect this event to the update VIP function. In addition to that, we also want to call this function whenever a player is leaving our game, because we don't need to unnecessarily store players inside of this table if the player is not even in the game. So we can do that by saying players.playerRemoving, :connect, And then we can go ahead and connect that to the update VIP function as well. And now the last time that we're actually going to want to call this function is when this player joins the game for the first time. And now in order to call the update VIP function, first we need to determine if this player is actually a VIP or not. So because of this, what we're going to do is create a variable called isVIP. And to determine if the player is a VIP or not, we're of course going to use the state controller. We'll get the player's state, and then we'll check if VIP is set to true or false. Now that we've gotten that information, let's go ahead and call the function. So we'll say local.updateVIP, pass through our player, which actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we could have kept that player variable that we had inside of here earlier, but it doesn't really matter. It's only a tiny little line. So we'll say players.localPlayer just like that. And then we want to pass through isVIP to tell that function if the player is subscribed or not. Cool. So now that we've implemented all of that, the final thing that we have to do is implement kind of the coolest thing here, which is modifying the text chat messages for the player. So what we're going to do is go below our update VIP function, because we're going to go ahead and create another function, which again is going to be a part of the local table. And we're going to go ahead and call this function update message. Now, this function is going to have a single parameter, which is going to be called message, and that's of the text chat message type. And you're probably unfamiliar with the text chat message. What I would recommend that you do is take a quick look at Roblox's text chat service documentation on their website, because it'll really help you understand everything that we're actually doing and how the systems actually work and different things like that. But basically, this function is going to be called anytime a text chat message is coming through. So if another person sends a text chat message, then this event will be fired when this client actually receives that text chat message. So then what we're going to do is, before we actually display that message, is we're going to modify the message a little bit in case the player is a VIP or not, in order to make that chat message appear and display if the player is a VIP or not. So to do this, the first thing that we actually need to do is create an instance which is called text chat message properties. And it sounds a little bit weird, but just follow along. We're going to go ahead and create a variable called message props. Props is short for properties. And then we'll say instance.new. And the instance that we want to create, again, is text chat message properties. And we're creating this instance because, I don't know, kind of by the name, I feel like it's a little bit obvious, but this instance allows us to modify the properties of a text chat message. So now that we've created that, what we're going to do is create a variable called source. The reason for that is because the message actually has a property called text source, which references the origin of the text source. And 99% of the time, the text source will actually be another player, unless you scripted your own system, which also sends text chat messages. But like I said, generally the source will be an actual player who is sending the message. Then, as long as we get a source, what we're going to do is then create a variable called user ID and get the user ID from the text source. So we would say source.userID. Now that we have the player's user ID, we want to determine if this player is a VIP or not. So we can create a variable called isVIP. And to determine if the player is a VIP or not, we can look through the VIP players table. So we would say table.find. We'll look through the VIP players table for the user ID inside of there. And now if isVIP is true, then what we're going to do is modify the message props, and we want to modify the prefix text property. And now what we want to set it to, again, make sure you use the backtick, which is to the left of the 1 key. And first we're going to insert our chat prefix string. But then after that, what we're going to do is reinsert the original message.prefix text. So right here is where we're inserting our custom prefix, which is before we insert the original prefix text of the message. And keep in mind that the original prefix of the text message is usually the player's name. So first we insert VIP, then we insert the player's name, because of course the player's name is always displayed before their actual message inside of the chat. So this will display something like VIP with that emoji and then my name afterwards. And then after that, it'll continue displaying the original message of the text. Again, we're only updating the prefix text property of the message props. So it's not like we're modifying the entire message overall. Roblox already kind of has this broken up into different things like prefix text or text, which would be the actual text and the message that the other player has sent. So again, we're only modifying the prefix text here. But anyway, the last thing that we want to do inside of this function is actually return the message props. Cool. So now that we've done that, we're going to go back to the onStart function. And the first thing that we want to do inside of this function is use the text chat service, because we want to listen to an event called onIncomingMessage. And now this event is a little bit different. It's actually sort of a callback method, so we can't use connect or anything else like that. Instead, what we do is set it equal to a specific function. And of course, the function that we want to set it to is the update message function. So we have to just type it out just like this. So now anytime this client receives an incoming message, it'll run this function, which will check if the player who's typing that message out is actually a VIP or not. It'll then add that prefix behind the player's name to actually make that modification to the chat message before it's displayed in our chat. And now, since we've done that, we're fully finished with implementing the VIP system on the client side, but there's two small things that we actually have to do on the server side still. So we can go ahead and close out of this module and collapse the entire starter player surface. And like I said, we still need to do two things on the server side, so we'll go inside of the server script service, inside of the services folder, and what we're now going to do is actually implement our VIP perks other than the chat perk, for example. So we need to implement the player getting 2 rebirths as well as 2 skips every time those systems actually go off. So first, we'll go ahead and open up the Rebirth Service, and we'll go down to the Rebirth function. Before we create the Rebirth action, what we're going to do is create a variable called isVIP. And now to determine if the player is a VIP or not, we'll use their state, and then we'll use the VIP key. And then going down to the Rebirth action, we're going to go ahead and update this and actually add the amount key. And what we're going to set it to is if the player is a VIP, then we would set this to 2. Otherwise, we would set it to 1. And that's all that we have to do for implementing the Rebirth perk. So we can go ahead and close out of here. Then let's go ahead and open up the skip service. And we literally are going to do the exact same thing. So this time we'll go inside of the skip loop. We'll go right before the action right down here. We'll create a variable called isVIP, which again is equal to state.vip. And then we'll also add the amount here as well, which again, if the player is a VIP, then we would want to give them 2. Otherwise, we would give them 1 skip. And now that we've done all of that, we're fully finished with implementing the VIP system, so we can go ahead and close out of that, and then start up our game and test this out. So once we get into our game, the first thing I'm going to take a look at is how many skips that we have. Well, actually, we have a lot of time to wait before we get some more skips. So I'm actually going to go ahead and check rebirths first. Now, it might be a little bit hard to see, but currently I have 14 rebirths. And well, actually, wait a second, I didn't even purchase VIP. First, let me go ahead and purchase VIP. The text is a little bit messed up, which I don't know why that is. It's having a hard time actually displaying the price, which is a little bit weird, but I'm just going to go ahead and click subscribe with credit and whatever. And actually, now that we subscribed, we can see the bun disappeared. We can also see that we've gotten a badge, which I'm surprised that we've received a badge. But hey, we got a badge. Now, let me go ahead and try to rebirth. Again, we currently have 14 rebirths, so this should go up to 16. And when we rebirth, we can see that we now have 16 rebirths, so that is working correctly. Then if we take a look at the skips, we currently have, well, let's just look at the last 2 numbers. So currently the last 2 numbers are 90, and once this timer finishes, we should go up to 92. And that's exactly what happened. We went up to 92 because we are a VIP. So that's working perfectly. Then let's go ahead and type a message in chat. So I'll go ahead and say hi. And when I type a message in chat, we can see that I do have the prefix right there. Now it is a little bit hard to see, so let me kind of change the device emulation to physical size, and we can now see the prefix right there as well. Originally, I said that this prefix was green, but clearly I'm colorblind, or maybe just forgot. It's actually yellow and not green, but that's what the prefix looks like. So that's looking pretty good. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be it for this episode. As always, if you did enjoy, make sure you smash the like button. Please leave a comment down below letting other people know that it did work. I and they really do appreciate it. It helps everyone out. And as usual, if you want to gain access to all the scripts and the game file that we made during this episode, as well as a ton of other assets, you can visit monster.dev or my Patreon, link down below in the description to both of these. You can gain access to a ton of assets to easily create your next Roblox game, as well as support me in creating all the content that I create. Anyways, with all that being said, I hope that you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.